Julian Ashford was 38 years old when his ex-wife walked back into his office, 3 years after she'd called him unstable and walked out mid-crisis. He'd rebuilt everything since then, his company now worth $300 million. He never expected to see her again, let alone like this, visibly pregnant, asking for 5 minutes. She told him the baby was his, from a night he had no memory of, and framed it as fate finding its way back to him. But Julian didn't get rich by believing what he was told. He sat across from her, calm, silent, watching her mention his company's valuation like it was an afterthought, like she hadn't rehearsed that line in the mirror. She had no idea what she'd just walked into. And in that quiet conference room, Julian made a decision that would unravel everything she thought she'd already gotten away with. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The control room was quiet at 6 in the morning. Julian Ashford liked it that way. The overhead lights were still dimmed to their night setting, casting a cool blue glow across 3 rows of monitors. Each screen showed a different slice of the same living machine. Shipping routes across 11 time zones, real-time cargo weight data, port clearance flags blinking green and yellow and occasionally red. The hum of the servers was the only sound, low and steady, like a pulse. Julian stood at the main console with a coffee mug in one hand and a stylus in the other. He wore a gray Henley, dark trousers, clean sneakers, no tie, no performance, just a man and his numbers at an hour when the rest of the city was still asleep. He tapped through the overnight data with the same focused calm he brought to everything. A flagged delay out of Rotterdam. A reroute through Memphis that had added 6 hours to a pharmaceutical delivery. He noted both, drafted a short message to the logistics lead, and moved on. His eyes caught a small anomaly in the Southeast Asia cluster, a weight discrepancy on a shipment out of Singapore that didn't match the manifest. Probably a data entry error. He flagged it anyway. Small things ignored became big things later. He'd learned that the hard way. By 7:30, the rest of the team had filtered in. The control room filled with voices, the smell of fresh coffee, the soft percussion of keyboards. Julian's morning stand-up was 15 minutes, no more. He ran it from the center of the room, no podium, no slides. Just him talking through the overnight numbers like a man who had read every line twice before anyone else arrived, because he had. Rotterdam delay clears by noon their time, he said. Memphis reroute is already compensated in the system. Singapore manifest gets a manual check before that shipment moves. Any questions? There were a few. He answered them without hesitation. His team moved with confidence because he moved with confidence, and they all knew it. Marisol Reyes fell into step beside him as the stand-up broke. She was his COO, had been for 4 years. Sharp eyes, a quiet laugh, and a memory for details that sometimes unsettled even him. Milestone deck is ready for Friday, she said, sliding a tablet into his hands. The updated valuation has us sitting comfortably at $300 million. Pre-IPO projections are holding. Julian looked at the numbers. Let them land. Good, he said. That's it? Good? Marisol gave him a look. Julian, $300 million. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile. It's a number, Marisol. A good one. Let's make sure it's still good on Monday. She shook her head, but she was smiling too. One day, I'm going to get a real reaction out of you. Keep trying, he said, and handed back the tablet. He ate lunch at his desk, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that he actually tasted it, because Odessa called and made him stop what he was doing. His older sister had a way of doing that, cutting through whatever he was buried in just by picking up the phone. You eating? She asked, by way of hello. Sandwich, he said. Actual food or just protein bar number 4? Sandwich, Odessa. Okay. A pause. He could hear her shuffling papers in the background. She worked at a family law firm downtown, paralegal going on 12 years, and she was almost always shuffling something. "I'm just checking in. You sound tired." "I'm fine." "You always say that, because I usually am." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted slightly, softer, but more pointed. "You hear anything from the Mercer deal? Someone told me they were pushing to fast-track your IPO timeline." "We're managing it." "Julian." She said his name like she was setting something down carefully. "I just want to make sure you've got the right people in your corner. Not just professionally. You have a way of—" She stopped, started again. "You trust people when they've earned it. I know that. I just sometimes think the wall you built goes up slower than you think it does." Julian leaned back in his chair. Outside his office window, the city moved in its usual rush. Cabs, pedestrians, the gray shimmer of an overcast November sky. "I appreciate that," he said. And he meant it. "Okay," Odessa said. "Good. Go eat your sandwich." He did. At 4:15, his assistant Marcus appeared in the doorway. The young man had a careful expression, the kind people wear when they're not sure how their news will land. "Mr. Ashford, there's a woman in the lobby." A short pause. "She doesn't have an appointment. She said to tell you her name is Ivy. She's asking for 5 minutes." Julian didn't move. He set down his pen slowly, the way a person does when they need a second to make sure their hands stay steady. He hadn't heard that name in 3 years. He looked up at Marcus. "What does she look like?" Marcus hesitated. "She's—" He cleared his throat. "She's visibly pregnant, sir." The room didn't change. The monitors still glowed. The servers still hummed. Julian's face stayed exactly where it was. "Tell her I'll be down in 5 minutes," he said. Julian took the elevator down. He didn't rush. He straightened his Henley in the reflection of the polished metal doors, not out of vanity, but out of habit. Composure was a choice. He made it every morning, and he made it again now. The lobby of Ashford Logistics was all clean lines and warm wood. A few low chairs, a receptionist desk, glass walls that looked out onto the street. Julian saw her before she saw him. Ivy was standing near the windows with one hand resting lightly on her round belly. She wore a cream-colored coat, her dark hair pulled back, her posture careful and deliberate. She looked the same as he remembered in the ways that mattered. Put together, polished, performing. 3 years hadn't changed that. She turned when she heard the elevator open. "Julian," she said. Her voice was warm. Practiced warm. "Ivy." He said it flat. Not cold, just empty of the thing she was fishing for. "Come with me." He put her in conference room B. Not his office, not the main boardroom. A neutral room with a round table, 4 chairs, and a glass of water he had Marcus bring before excusing the young man entirely. Julian sat across from her, hands resting loosely on the table, and waited. He had learned a long time ago that silence was a tool. Most people couldn't stand it. They filled it. Ivy filled it. "I know this is a shock," she said. "I know the last thing you expected was to see me walk through that door. And I know we didn't end things perfectly. Why are you here, Ivy?" It wasn't a question. It was a direction. She took a breath. Her hands moved to her belly again. That same deliberate touch. "The baby is yours, Julian." The room was very quiet. "From a night about 6 months ago," she continued, her voice dropping like she was confiding in him. "Do you remember? I came by your apartment. I was upset. Preston and I had gotten into this huge fight, and I wasn't thinking straight. You were kind to me. We talked. And then—" She paused, letting the silence do the work she wanted it to do. "It just happened." Julian looked at her steadily. "I don't have any memory of that night." "Julian, I don't have any memory of you coming to my apartment 6 months ago," he said again, the same way he'd said the first time. Even, clear, without a crack in it. "I don't have any memory of any version of that evening." Something moved behind her eyes, quick, like a fish turning in dark water. Then it was gone. Maybe you'd had a long week, she said softly. You work so hard. You always did. It was late, and maybe… I remember my evenings, Ivy. She shifted in her chair. She looked down at the table for a moment, and when she looked back up, her expression had changed slightly, softer, more fragile. It was a gear she knew how to shift into. I wasn't going to come to you, she said. I really wasn't. I was going to handle this on my own, I swear. But then I read that article. She paused as if catching herself, then continued, the piece about the company, about where things are heading, and I thought, he deserves to know. This baby deserves to know his father. I wasn't thinking about any of that when I came here. I just thought it was, I don't know, like it was meant to be. Like maybe this is how things were supposed to go for us. She said it gently, with a small, almost shy tilt of her head. Julian said nothing. The article she mentioned had run 11 days ago in a business magazine. The headline had called him one of the most important logistics innovators of his generation. The second paragraph had confirmed the $300 million valuation. It had been shared widely. Ivy had clearly read it carefully. She was watching him now, looking for something to work with. A wince, a softening, a flicker of old feeling. He gave her none of it. I need time to process this, he said. Of course. I understand. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her number, written by hand. She slid it across the table toward him. I just ask that you do the right thing, Julian. Whatever that looks like. I know you've always been that kind of man. He didn't pick up the paper. He looked at it. I'll be in touch, he said. She left. Julian stayed in the room. He sat very still, the way he did when he was working through a problem that mattered. Her number sat on the table in front of him like a small accusation. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. 6 months back. He scrolled through it slowly. Meetings, travel, a red-eye to Seattle, a dinner with investors in Chicago, 2 weeks that included a long stretch of 16-hour days when they were finalizing the funding round. He went through every week. There was no night that matched what she described. Not even close. And the article she claimed hadn't influenced her. She'd mentioned it anyway. Julian got home a little after 7. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't pour a drink. He went straight to his home office, sat down at his desk, and stared at the far wall for a long moment. Not blanking out, but organizing, filing things in the right order before he spoke them out loud. Then he called Odessa. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, rough day? Ivy showed up at my office today, he said. A beat. Ivy Calloway showed up at your… Yes. A longer pause this time. He could hear her shifting, the faint sound of a chair rolling against hardwood. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Odessa worked in family law. He'd watched her shift into that mode before. It sounded like a door closing, quiet and firm. Tell me everything, she said. He did. He laid it out the same way he'd laid out everything in that room. Flat, in order, without extra weight on any one piece. Ivy's appearance, the pregnancy, the claim about a night 6 months ago he had no memory of, the gentle, deliberate hand on her belly, the article she'd mentioned without meaning to mention. Odessa let him finish. She said she and Preston had a big fight, she said. That she was alone and upset. That's what she said. Julian. Her voice carried a note he recognized, the one she used when a client was about to hear something they needed to hear. I heard from Tamara. You remember Tamara? She went to school with Ivy. I heard from her back in November that Ivy and Preston have been on and off for over 1.5 years. At least. He leaned forward slightly. How on and off? On and off like they fight. They split up. They get back together. Repeatedly. It's been a whole thing, apparently. Odessa paused. Which means the story she told you, that she was freshly devastated, freshly alone, freshly vulnerable enough to show up at your door 6 months ago? That doesn't line up. If they've been cycling through this for 18 months, she wasn't some wounded woman who didn't know which way was up. She knew exactly what she was doing. Julian was quiet. He thought about the way Ivy had tilted her head. That small, almost shy angle, like it was meant to be. She rehearsed it, he said. Not with bitterness, just recognition. She rehearsed something, Odessa said. I don't know the full picture, but I know that story she gave you has holes in it. I want to know more about those holes. I figured you would. He could hear her already reaching for something. A notebook, probably. Odessa was old-fashioned about certain things. What are you thinking? I'm not reacting to anything, he said. Not yet. Not publicly. Not to her. Not to anyone. I want to know what's actually true before I say a single word that matters. Good. I need you to quietly look into Ivy and Preston. Their history, when they actually got together, whatever's on the record. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that tips anyone off. Just what's findable. Easy enough, she said. I've got a few ways to run that down without making noise. I also need a paternity test. Not through her. Not through anyone she picks or influences or has access to. I want it done through my own attorney and a clinic I choose myself. And I want the results to go directly to me. Smart. Take the process completely out of her hands. Odessa made a sound that wasn't quite approval, but was close to it. I can point you to a lab that handles sensitive cases, completely private, chain of custody documentation, court-admissible results. No one touches it but your team. Send me the information. You'll have it in an hour. She paused. There's one more thing I'd do if I were you. Preston? Preston, she confirmed. A man who stays with a woman while she runs a scheme like this, whether he knows about it fully or not, usually has a reason. And that reason is usually money. Julian nodded at no one. He'd already been turning that thought over. Preston Wexler. He'd seen the name before. Somewhere at the edge of his awareness. A real estate developer. Mid-size projects. The kind of man who had the right clothes and the right handshake, and almost the right track record. Almost. I'm going to call Marisol, Julian said. Off the clock? Off the clock. As a friend. I want her to pull any public records tied to Preston's business. Liens, filings, debt records, anything visible. Don't tell her everything yet. I won't. He glanced at the window. The city was dark outside, a few lights in the distance, the hum of it steady and indifferent. I just need to know what kind of trouble he's in. Okay. Odessa's voice softened slightly, just at the edges. Julian. Are you all right? He considered the question honestly. Yeah, he said. I'm clear. He called Marisol after they hung up. Kept it brief. Public records on Preston Wexler. Real estate filings. Any court records. Anything accessible. She asked no questions. She said she'd have something for him by morning. After he ended the call, Julian set his phone down on the desk. He looked at it for a moment. Ivy had walked into his building today thinking she knew who she was dealing with, thinking she'd be met with panic or guilt or the soft weight of old feeling. She had no idea what she'd walked into. 2 days passed. Julian spent both of them working. He reviewed contracts. He sat in meetings. He approved a logistics framework for a new client in the Pacific Northwest and signed off on 2 budget proposals for Q3. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was the point. On the morning of the 3rd day, his attorney called. Test is scheduled for Friday, Daniel Park said. He was concise by nature, which was one of the reasons Julian had used him for 6 years. I sent the cooperation request to Ivy's attorney yesterday afternoon. Certified mail and email. They have 7 business days to respond formally, but I flagged it as time-sensitive given the nature of the claim. She'll cooperate, Julian said. She needs the test to look legitimate. That's what I assumed. A brief pause. There's something else. I received a document from her attorney this morning. Julian waited. A formal support demand letter, Daniel said. Structured, detailed, and drafted with a level of specificity that takes time. Legal time. Another pause, smaller. Julian, the test hasn't been run yet. There are no results. There is no established paternity. And yet this letter is written as though all of that is already settled. Julian sat back in his chair. How long would something like that take to draft? With a good attorney? A week, minimum. For something this detailed? Probably 2. He looked at the window. So she had this drafted before she came to my office. That's what the timeline suggests, Daniel said. She walked in, made the claim, and the support letter was ready to send before you could even request a test. Julian didn't say anything for a moment. He wasn't surprised. He was something else, a kind of cold, precise recognition. He'd felt it before. Not with Ivy specifically, with a vendor who'd tried to overbill him years ago, with a partner who'd tried to undermine a deal while smiling at his face. The feeling of watching the shape of a lie come into focus. Don't engage with the letter's substance, Julian said. Not one line. Send back a single response. We acknowledge receipt, and we will address all matters once the paternity test results are available and verified. Nothing more. Understood. If they push back? Same response, repeated verbatim, Daniel said, and Julian could hear the slight satisfaction in his voice. I'll have it out this afternoon. Marisol came by at noon. She didn't email the records. She printed them and brought them in a plain manila folder, setting it on the table in Julian's office with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything. She sat across from him while he read. The file on Preston Wexler was not short. 3 liens filed against his primary development, LLC, all within the last 8 months. A mixed-use project in the west side of the city, 42 units, commercial ground floor, had stalled out mid-construction. The contractor had walked. 2 investors had filed civil complaints. The whole thing had frozen in place, like a stopped clock, and Preston's name was on every filing. Julian turned a page. Another lien. A smaller one, personal this time, tied to a property in Preston's own name. What's the total estimated debt exposure? Julian asked. Based on what's public? Marisol folded her hands on the table. Somewhere between 2.3 and 2.8 million. There could be more that hasn't surfaced yet. Julian set the folder down. He looked at the dates. The first lien had been filed 9 months ago. The second, 8 months ago. Right around the time, give or take a few weeks, that Ivy had allegedly appeared at his apartment. Vulnerable. Alone. Just needing to see him. 9 months ago, his development deal starts collapsing, Julian said. 8 months ago, the liens start stacking up. 6 months ago, Ivy shows up at my door. Marisol didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The sequence spoke for itself. She wasn't running from a fight with him, Julian said quietly. She was running toward a solution. He called Odessa that evening. She already knew about the support letter. He'd sent her a summary earlier. She'd used one specific word in her reply text. Brazen. She had that drafted in advance, Odessa said, which means she was confident. Not hopeful. Confident. She expected you to take the claim at face value and start negotiating. She's used to it working, Julian said. Confidence reads as credibility to most people. Not to you. No. He glanced at the open folder on his desk. Preston's liens still fanned out across it. Odessa, I keep coming back to one thing. She left 3 years ago. She gave me a reason, but I never really looked at the timing. I was in the middle of everything with the company. He stopped. Chose a different word. I accepted it. A beat. Pull the original divorce filing, he said. From 3 years ago. I want the actual date she filed, and I want to know what was happening with the company that same week. Odessa was quiet for a second, not hesitating, thinking. You think the divorce wasn't about the company struggling, she said slowly. You think it was because of the company? I think this goes deeper than one lie, Julian said. I want to know how deep. Odessa arrived on a Saturday morning with a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and 2 coffees from the place on Mercer Street that Julian liked. She set both cups on his kitchen counter, pulled out a thick stack of papers from the bag, and laid them flat on the dining table without saying much. That was how she operated when something mattered. Less talk first. Documents first. Julian sat down across from her. The top sheet was the divorce filing, the original. Date-stamped by the county clerk's office 3 years ago, the ink faded slightly at the edges from being photocopied more than once. His name was printed there in plain black type. Respondent, Julian Marcus Ashford. He'd seen this document before, years ago, when it was still a fresh wound. Looking at it now felt different, quieter, like examining a scar. "What's the date?" he asked, even though he could read it himself. "March 14th, Odessa said. 3 years ago." Julian nodded slowly. He already knew what had happened that March. He didn't need to look it up. It was one of those stretches of time that had burned itself into his memory, whether he wanted it there or not. "The week before she filed," he said, "I had a call with our Series B lead. Internal only. The numbers were finally starting to move in the right direction. Nobody outside the core team knew yet." Odessa tapped a second sheet. "Keep reading." The next pages were printouts of text messages. They'd been obtained through a subpoena Julian's attorney had filed as part of the paternity dispute. A standard move in cases where a party's prior conduct and credibility were relevant. The texts were between Ivy and a woman named Chloe Marsh. Julian recognized the name. They'd been close friends in college. He read. The first message that stopped him was dated 2 weeks before the divorce filing. Ivy to Chloe. "I'm not doing this anymore. I've been patient, but I'm not going down with his ship." Chloe had written back, "Are you sure? You've been saying this for months." Ivy, "I'm sure. I heard him on the phone with someone from the investment group. He sounded excited, but it's not going to happen. These things never do. I'd rather get out now while I still look reasonable." Julian read that message twice. He set the page down on the table. He picked up his coffee. He took a slow sip. Outside the dining room window, the street was quiet. A neighbor's sprinkler clicked on somewhere down the block. "She overheard the Series B call," he said. "That's what it looks like," Odessa said. "And she decided it wouldn't work out." "She was certain," Odessa said. "That's the word she uses. I'd rather get out now. Not I'm afraid, not I don't know if he can do this. She made a decision based on a prediction." Then, the prediction was wrong. Julian looked at the next message. It was dated 4 days before the filing. Ivy to Chloe. "He's going to be fine on his own. He always lands on his feet. This isn't me abandoning him. I'm just protecting myself." And then, 3 months later, after the Series B closed, after the first real press hit the business pages, a single message from Ivy that read like something she'd typed and deleted and retyped until the anger went flat. "You see that piece about Julian's company? Unbelievable. Chloe, are you okay?" Ivy hadn't responded to that one. Julian let the pages settle on the table. He didn't feel the way he might have expected to feel. Not crushed. Not furious. There was something smaller than anger moving through him. Something more like the feeling of finally understanding a question that had been sitting in the back of his mind for 3 years. Why had she really left? He'd told himself it was fear. He'd almost made peace with that. Fear was human. Fear made sense. But this wasn't fear. "She wasn't afraid I'd fail," Julian said. "She was certain I would. And when I didn't—" He stopped, thought about how to say it. "She couldn't forgive me for it." "No," Odessa agreed. "She couldn't." She folded her hands around her own cup. "And that's what this is now, Julian. It's not desperation. It's not some confused moment where things got complicated. She has a pattern. She calculates what benefits her. She moves toward it. And when it doesn't pay out, she recalibrates and tries again." She paused. The paternity claim isn't an accident. It's the next move. Julian looked at his sister. She wasn't saying anything he hadn't already suspected, but hearing it laid out that plainly, with paper on the table to back it up, made the shape of it undeniable. He wasn't angry. He was resolved. Those were two different things, and he'd learned a long time ago to tell them apart. "The test results," he said. Daniel said, "Any day now." "I know. Whatever they say." Julian looked back at the documents spread across the table. The filing, the texts, the dates, the pattern, assembled piece by piece until it held together like a structure you could walk around and examine from every side. Whatever they say, I'm not just denying one claim. I'm going to put all of this on the table. The divorce, the debt, the demand letter she had drafted before she even walked into my office. He looked up. All of it. Odessa held his gaze. She didn't argue. Daniel Cho's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, all glass and dark wood, the kind of place designed to make you feel like decisions made inside it were permanent. Julian had been here before. He knew the elevator code, the receptionist's name, the way the afternoon light cut through the blinds at an angle that made you squint if you sat in the wrong chair. He sat in the right chair. Daniel set a sealed envelope on the desk between them. He didn't open it himself. That wasn't how he did things. Julian picked it up. He broke the seal with one clean pull, unfolded the single sheet inside, and read it. The language was clinical. It always was. Reference numbers, sample IDs, a probability figure printed in bold at the bottom of the page. The number was 0.0%. The conclusion beneath it was one sentence. Julian Marcus Ashford is excluded as the biological father of the subject child. He read it once, then he set it back down on the desk. "Okay," he said. Daniel watched him. "You all right?" "I'm fine." Julian straightened the page against the desk's edge, lining it up like it was a document he'd be filing. "What do we do next?" Daniel opened a folder. "We get it notarized today. I've already called downstairs. They have a notary on staff. Once it's stamped, I'll send written notice to Ivy's attorney that the claim has been conclusively resolved, and we consider the matter closed." "Good." Julian looked up. "I want it on record. No second test. No informal arrangement. No continued discussion of this claim in any form." "Understood. If she contacts me directly about this, calls, texts, emails, messages through anyone else, I want it logged and treated as harassment. Not ignored. Logged." Daniel nodded, writing as Julian spoke. "I'll have the notice drafted by end of day. And I want a copy of everything. The result, the notarization, the notice to her attorney, all of it. You'll have it tonight." Julian picked up the test result again. He looked at the number one more time. 0. He folded the page carefully, creased it with his thumb, and set it on Daniel's side of the desk. "Then we're done here," he said. He was home by 4 o'clock. By 7, Ivy had called his cell phone 4 times. He didn't answer. He didn't block the number either, because blocked calls didn't leave records, and he wanted the record. Each missed call showed up in his phone log with a timestamp. He screenshot every one of them and emailed the image to Daniel. By 9, Odessa called him. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not react. Tell me." "She's been calling people." Odessa's voice was careful. "Marcus and Delia, the Fowlers. Apparently a few people from the old neighborhood too. Saying you got the results and you're refusing to step up. That you're walking away from your own child." Julian said nothing for a moment. "Is Marcus asking questions?" he said. "He texted me. I told him to hold tight." "Good." Julian walked to his kitchen window and looked out at the street below. It was quiet out there. Yellow light from the lamp on the corner. A car moving slowly past. She can make the calls. Let her. Every one of those calls is a record of her maintaining a claim the test already closed. It only makes our case cleaner. "I know," Odessa said. "I just wanted you to hear it from me first. I appreciate that." He didn't sleep well, not because he was shaken, he wasn't, but because there was a particular kind of stillness required to sit inside a situation like this and not move, not respond, not give the other person anything to grab onto. It took energy to hold that still. He'd learned that about himself years ago. Daniel called him on Tuesday morning. "Boone came through," he said without preamble. Dr. Yvette Boone was the administrator at the fertility clinic Ivy had visited during early monitoring appointments. Julian's attorney had submitted a formal legal request for the clinic's records related to the conception timeline, relevant and obtainable under the scope of the paternity dispute. Dr. Boone had responded through proper channels only. No informal contact, no commentary. Just the records, certified, attached to a legal cover letter. Daniel read the key date out loud. Julian wrote it down on the notepad beside his phone. He stared at the number for a long moment. The date of conception, as confirmed by the clinic's own records, fell 14 weeks before Ivy had shown up in his lobby. 14 weeks before she'd sat across from him in his conference room, one hand resting on her stomach, telling him the baby was his. She had known when she walked in. She had known the whole time. The baby was Preston's. It had always been Preston's. And Ivy had looked Julian in the eye and said, "Fate," like it was a word that meant something, when the only thing it had ever meant to her was money. Julian capped his pen. He set it down. "Send me the records," he said. "I'll be in touch." The conference table in Daniel's office was long enough to seat 12. That morning, there were 4 of them: Julian, Odessa, Marisol, and Daniel himself. 4 cups of coffee. 1 stack of folders, tabbed and ordered, sitting in the middle of the table like something that had been waiting a long time to be opened. Marisol had driven in from across town before 8. She'd brought a second set of printed records because she didn't trust digital copies in rooms like this. That was the kind of person she was, the kind who thought 2 steps past the obvious. Daniel opened the first folder. "Let's go in order," Julian said. They did. It took 40 minutes to go through everything. Odessa walked them through the divorce records first. The filing date, the texts she'd pulled through the subpoena, the message Ivy had sent to her friend, "Getting out before he drags me down," stamped with a date that landed 3 weeks after Ivy had overheard a private conversation about Julian's upcoming funding round. The round she'd been certain would fall apart. The round that didn't. "She left because she thought you were finished," Odessa said, not for the first time. But saying it here, at a table with documents in front of them, made it land differently. "And she came back because you weren't." Marisol went next. She laid out Preston's financial records across the center of the table, like a hand of cards. Liens filed against 3 of his properties. A failed development deal that had cost him 2 investors and left him exposed on a construction loan he couldn't refinance. The timeline she'd mapped on a single typed page showed the liens filed 8 months ago, right around the time Ivy had allegedly reconciled with Julian. She needed a way out of Preston's mess, Marisol said, and she found one. Daniel took over from there. He walked through the demand letter Ivy's attorney had sent before the paternity test results existed. The precise legal language, the dollar figure attached to it, the date it was filed. She didn't wait for the science, Daniel said, because she was never interested in the science. Then he opened the last folder. Dr. Boone's records, the certified clinic documents, the conception date, 14 weeks before Ivy had walked into Julian's lobby. Everyone at the table already knew the number. They'd each seen it separately. But reading it together, in order, after everything else, it changed the weight of it. It wasn't just a lie. It was a lie she'd built a plan around. A plan with a demand letter and a dollar figure, and a story carefully designed to make Julian feel responsible for something she'd known was never his. Odessa leaned back in her chair. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Marisol was quieter. She just looked at the page. "Okay," Julian said. He closed the folder. "I'm not settling. And I'm not making a public statement." Daniel looked at him. "What do you want to do?" "I want one meeting. In person. This office." Julian looked at Daniel directly. "Frame it to Ivy as a closing conversation on the claim. Tell her we have the results and want to resolve things formally, face to face. Make it sound like I'm willing to talk." "And Preston?" Daniel asked. "Invite him separately. Tell him Ivy asked for his presence. Make it routine." Julian's voice was even. "He doesn't know what's in these folders. He doesn't know the timeline. He's been carrying that pregnancy like it was a burden he didn't fully understand. And Ivy's been letting him." Odessa looked at her brother. "You want him in the room when she finds out we have all of it?" "I want both of them in the room," Julian said. "Together. At the same time. So neither one of them gets to walk out of here and control what the other one hears." The room was quiet for a moment. "Once Preston sees that conception date," Marisol said slowly, "he'll know the baby is his." "Yes," Julian said. "And he'll know Ivy knew." "Yes." Marisol nodded once, like a period at the end of a sentence. Daniel picked up his pen. "I'll reach out to both of them today. I can have the meeting set for Thursday or Friday." "Thursday," Julian said. "I'll draft the invitation separately. Different language for each." Daniel was already writing. "Ivy gets the version that sounds like a conversation. Preston gets the version that sounds like a formality." "Good." Daniel looked up. 3 days. 3 days, Julian said. He spent those 3 days at his desk, not distracted, not anxious. He worked his regular hours, answered his regular emails, sat in on 2 calls about the company's upcoming IPO roadshow. He was present for all of it. He was always present, but every evening, after the workday ended and the building emptied out, he opened the folder on his desk. He went through each document one more time. The dates, the texts, the liens, the demand letter, the clinic records. He read them the way he used to read financial projections before a big pitch, looking for the gap, looking for the thing he might have missed. He never found one. By Wednesday night, the case was airtight. Thursday arrived gray and quiet. The conference room on the 14th floor of Daniel's building had no windows to the outside world, just 4 walls, a long table, and the kind of stillness that only existed in rooms designed for hard conversations. 8 chairs, 6 of them filled. Julian sat at one end, Odessa 2 seats to his left. Daniel sat at the head, his folders stacked in front of him, already open. Marisol had stayed back at the office at Julian's request. This wasn't her room to be in, but everything she'd found was here, printed and tabbed, right where it needed to be. Ivy arrived 3 minutes late. She wore a fitted gray dress that drew the eye to her stomach. Her hair was done. Her expression, when she walked in, was exactly what Julian expected. Soft, open, rehearsed. The face of a woman who believed she still had leverage. Preston came in behind her. He was dressed like a man who had somewhere else to be afterward. Dark jacket, clean shoes, a little too put together for a room he'd been told was just a formality. He scanned the space quickly when he entered. The table, the folders, Julian's face, and something in his expression shifted just slightly. A flicker, like a man who'd walked into a meeting and immediately suspected it was something else. He sat down next to Ivy. Ivy glanced at Preston, then back at Julian. She gave Julian a small, careful smile. "I appreciate you agreeing to sit down," she said. "I know this hasn't been easy." Julian didn't return the smile. He looked at Daniel. "Let's begin," Daniel said. Daniel didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. He opened the first folder and walked through each piece in the same order they'd reviewed it 3 days ago. His voice was flat and professional, the voice of a man presenting a set of facts that required no emotion to be devastating. He started with the divorce, the filing date, the texts. The specific message, getting out before he drags me down, and the date attached to it. He slid a copy toward the center of the table. This message was sent 3 weeks after Ms. Calloway overheard a conversation regarding Mr. Ashford's upcoming funding round, Daniel said. A round she believed would fail. The divorce was filed 11 days after this message. Ivy exhaled through her nose. That's completely out of context, she said. I was venting to a friend. That's what people do when they're scared. The record doesn't suggest fear, Daniel said. He said it the way you'd state a temperature. It suggests calculation. He moved to the next folder. Preston's financial records came next. The liens, the failed development, the construction loan. The timeline page Marisol had typed up, mapping debt dates against the date Ivy had allegedly sought Julian out. Daniel placed it on the table and left it there. Preston's jaw tightened. He looked at the page, but said nothing. Ms. Calloway approached Mr. Ashford approximately 8 months after these liens were filed, Daniel said. Mr. Wexler's financial exposure at that point was significant. A successful paternity claim against Mr. Ashford would have resolved a substantial portion of that pressure. I had nothing to do with Preston's finances, Ivy said. Her voice had sharpened. The softness was going. That's insulting. That's an outright... The demand letter, Daniel said. He opened the next folder and placed a copy in the center of the table. The date was clearly visible at the top. This was filed by your attorney 9 days before the paternity test results were available, Daniel said. It specifies a dollar figure. It requests expedited processing. He paused. You submitted a legal demand for financial support before there was any scientific basis to support the claim. Ivy opened her mouth. Confusion doesn't draft legal documents, Julian said. It was the first time he'd spoken since the meeting started. His voice was calm. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Ivy looked at him. For just a moment, the rehearsed expression slipped. Something colder moved underneath it. Then she recovered. I was under a lot of stress, she said. My attorney got ahead of things. I can't control every... Daniel placed the last folder on the table. Dr. Boone's records, the certified clinic documents. He turned the page so the figures faced the table, and he read the conception date aloud. The room went completely still. Preston turned to look at the page. He read the date once. Then he read it again. He looked up slowly. His eyes went to Ivy. They stayed there. 14 weeks before Ivy had walked into Julian's lobby. The math was simple. The math was brutal. And the math left no version of events where the child belonged to anyone but the man sitting right next to her. Ivy's hand moved to her stomach, reflexive, like a shield. Preston, she started. Don't. His voice came out low and stripped clean. No heat in it. Just a man who had suddenly, completely understood something he hadn't let himself look at before. Don't explain it. He stared at her for another moment. Then he pushed back his chair. He stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the seat, folded it over his arm, and looked at Ivy one last time. We're done, he said. And he walked out. Preston Wexler's name appeared in 3 industry newsletters. Not because anyone ran a story about him. Not because Julian called anyone. The financial records Daniel's office had formally submitted as part of the paternity dispute were public record the moment they entered the legal process. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. The documents existed. People who needed to see them eventually did. The first call came to Preston's investors on a Tuesday. Not from Julian. Not from Daniel. From a title company doing routine due diligence on one of Preston's active development deals, a mixed-use project in the Northern Corridor that 2 private equity partners had been quietly funding for 8 months. The title company pulled the liens as part of their process. They saw the dates. They saw the amounts. They saw how close to the surface the water already was. By Thursday, both partners had suspended their commitments pending review. The second deal collapsed faster. A commercial lot in a neighboring county, a smaller project, a handshake arrangement with a regional developer who'd worked with Preston twice before. The man called Preston directly. Marisol had pulled those same records weeks ago, and what that developer saw now wasn't new information. It was simply information he could no longer pretend he hadn't seen. "I heard some things," the developer said, according to a source Odessa mentioned offhandedly to Julian over the phone. "I needed to know if they were true." They were. Julian didn't call anyone to confirm them. He didn't need to. Daniel handled the Ivy documentation the way he handled everything. Methodically, without flourish. The demand letter had been sent before the test existed. That was documented. The clinic records established that Ivy had known the conception date before she walked into Julian's lobby. That was documented too. The gap between what she knew and what she claimed formed a clean, unambiguous line, and Daniel followed that line to its legal conclusion. He prepared a factual summary, not a complaint, not a letter written to wound, just a document laying out the sequence of events, the demand letter, the dates, the records, the paternity result. He attached the supporting exhibits the same way he attached everything, numbered, tabbed, in order. Then he sent it to Ivy's employer. Callaway PR, Ivy's boutique firm, was not a large operation. 11 employees. A client list built almost entirely on Ivy's personal relationships and the image she'd spent a decade curating. The firm's founder, a woman named Petra who had known Ivy since graduate school, received the packet on a Wednesday morning. Julian didn't know exactly when Petra read it. He didn't ask. He had no interest in the specifics of that conversation or what Ivy's face looked like when she was called in. What he knew was this. By the following Monday, Ivy's name had been quietly removed from the firm's client-facing page. Her assistant's extension now routed to someone else. The two speaking engagements Ivy had been listed for on a regional communications panel were filled by other speakers. Her income stopped. Her public profile, the carefully maintained thing she had tended for years, went dark. No press release, no public statement, no spectacle, just the absence of her name where it used to be. Odessa called Julian on Wednesday evening. "You doing all right?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "That's it? Just yeah?" "I'm good, Des." He leaned back in his desk chair and looked out the window. The city was moving the way it always moved in the early evening, slowly at first, then all at once. "I don't feel much about it. I thought I would." "Maybe that's the point. You didn't do any of this to feel something. You did it to close something." He thought about that for a moment. "Maybe. Daniel's good," she said. "The documentation is clean. Both matters are going to be fully closed by end of week. He told me this morning. And Preston? Not my problem anymore." Julian rubbed the back of his neck. He made his choices. The records just caught up to him. Odessa was quiet for a beat. "Ivy, too." "Ivy, too." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler, still practical, but softer at the edges. "I know this wasn't what you wanted 3 years ago. I know it wasn't what you wanted when she walked into your lobby either. But Julian—" She stopped. "You handled it right. All of it." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Go home, Des," he said finally. "I'm fine." She laughed once, low and familiar. "Already there. Good night." The confirmation email arrived at 9:47 on Friday morning. Daniel's name in the sender line. 4 sentences. Both matters formally documented and closed. No further action required or anticipated. All records retained and on file. Julian read it once. He set his phone face down on the desk and looked at the morning shipping metrics on his screen for a moment. Then he picked the phone back up. He opened his contact. He found Ivy's name. He didn't pause over it. He didn't sit with it or give it a final moment of meaning it hadn't earned. He pressed delete. And then he got back to work. 18 months later, The new headquarters smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Julian noticed it every morning when he stepped off the elevator onto the 14th floor. The building was a former warehouse in the East District. High ceilings, exposed steel beams, wide windows that caught the early light and spread it across the open floor like something warm and deliberate. His team had picked the space. He'd approved it in under 5 minutes. It was exactly right. The IPO had closed 3 weeks ago. Clean numbers, strong close, the kind of result that made the morning business pages and then quietly settled into permanence, the way real things do. The young man sitting across from Julian's desk was 26 years old and terrified in the way that serious people are terrified, quietly, while still showing up. His name was Marcus Webb. He ran a supply chain analytics startup out of a shared office 2 miles south of here. He'd sent Julian a cold email 6 months ago that was so precisely written, Julian had forwarded it to Marisol with a single line: set up a meeting. The problem isn't the product, Julian said. He set down Marcus's pitch deck and folded his hands on the desk. You know that. Your product works. Marcus nodded. Then what's the problem? You keep explaining the product like you're afraid people won't believe it works. That fear is louder than the product itself. Julian tilted his head slightly. Investors don't fund fear. They fund conviction. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his posture. Not defensiveness, but recognition. How do you stop being afraid? He asked. Julian thought about it honestly. You don't. Entirely. You just stop letting it run the meeting. Marcus almost smiled. Did someone tell you that once? No, Julian said simply. I had to find it out the hard way. He said it without weight. It was just true. Marisol knocked twice and opened the door without waiting, the way she'd always done, the way Julian had told her years ago she was allowed to do. Webb's car is downstairs, she said. Marcus stood, shook Julian's hand with both of his, and thanked him 3 times. Julian walked him to the door, told him to follow up after his next pitch meeting, and meant it. When Marcus was gone, Marisol leaned against the doorframe with a tablet in her hand and the calm, organized expression she'd worn every day for the last 5 years. Ops review is done, she said. Distribution contracts are finalized for Q2, and the Hartfield acquisition call is on for Monday at 8. You need me on the acquisition call? She gave him a look. I'll send you the summary after. Julian smiled. Good. She meant it, and so did he. The company ran the way it ran because Marisol ran it. Julian trusted her the way he trusted very few things, completely, and without needing to confirm it every day. Odessa arrived at his apartment at 7 with takeout and a bottle of wine she'd already opened in the car, which she admitted without embarrassment. They ate at the kitchen table the way they always had, plates close, elbows on the table, conversation going in 3 directions at once. They talked about her firm, about a case she couldn't name but described in careful circles. They talked about their mother's garden and a pipe that had burst in her basement and cost more to fix than it had any right to. At some point, the food was gone, and the wine was lower in the bottle, and the conversation slowed into the kind of quiet that only exists between people who've known each other long enough to trust the silence. You never yelled at her, Odessa said. She wasn't looking at him. She was turning her wineglass slowly on the table. Not once, not even when she was calling your friends, saying you'd abandoned her. Julian didn't answer right away. It wouldn't have helped, he said. I know. Odessa looked up. But most people would have. He shrugged. Most people would have signed the letter, too. She nodded once. That was enough. Somewhere across town, Ivy Calloway was closing out a client log for a small regional events company. 3rd-tier work, the kind of job that didn't come with a title that meant anything. She did it carefully and without complaint. She didn't think about Julian. She had learned, slowly, and without any moment of clarity, that thinking about him cost her more than it returned. Preston Wexler was in a smaller office now, 2 rooms on the 4th floor of a building that needed new windows. He was working on one project, a modest one. He showed up every day, answered his own phone, and didn't talk about what had happened unless someone asked directly, which they rarely did. He was rebuilding. It was slow, and it was real, and it was all he had. Neither of them was destroyed. Neither of them was forgiven either. Julian stood at his office window at the end of the day, watching the city fill up with evening light. He thought about Marcus Webb and the fear that runs a room if you let it. He thought about patience, real patience, not the passive kind, but the kind that gathers information and moves precisely and doesn't spend itself on anger it can't afford. That had been the thing. Not his money, not his attorney, not even the documents, as airtight as they were. His patience had protected him. Long before the evidence existed, his patience had kept the door open long enough to find it. He stood there a moment longer. Then he turned from the window, picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and closed the office door behind him. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.